Hey, my name is Harold Brown. I am a third-generation Arizonan. I was born in Nogales in 1942. My father in the same hospital that my father was born in. My grandmother is of the Parker family who settled Parker Canyon. Uh, my grandfather, great-grandfather, uh, James Parker came to Bisbee when it was a going mining town a lot to do business. Um, I remember we left Nogales in '46 after my father had returned from the war. Uh, and he took a job with the customs, and took us an assignment here in Naco at the border, and that was basically why we were here at that time. We lived in one of the officers' houses at the end of the road here, right before the curve, and to my knowledge, it was across the street from the old mess hall where the Newells lived. Um, um, my earliest memories of living here were of just playing around in the camp as it existed. It was run down and totally abandoned. You could enter any of the buildings. There was still a lot of litter from the occupation laying around. I'd run around playing cavalry with my friends, and my mother was very busy with her newborn daughter, and my dad was working a lot of the time, so my playground was this camp. The train would pass by because it was a main train that came down here. It was loaded with passengers. It would slow down at Naco to pick up people, and I would always run out, kind of, and try to act as an Indian. I painted my face with my mother's lipstick and put a feather in my hair and fashioned an old bow and arrow. And I would kind of shoot my arrow up in the air and try to scare the passengers as they were looking out the window at me. And I remember I had fond recollections of doing that. Otherwise, I was playing around. I was playing cavalry here in the fort, in the old camp, and um, those were my recollections. I remember the buildings filled with bats, and I would grab some of the bats and take them home, which scared my mother a lot. Um, and it was just a general playground for me. And I had fond recollections of when I returned years later, the smell of the area. I remembered it. You know, it was imprinted on my head and my brain about the smell of ocotillos and after a rainstorm, things all came back. I remember things from the house. I walked around, looked at the house, and it was a very fun time for me. I had a great fun here. Like I said, I don't ever recall going to school in Naco, and we left in 1950 when my father got an assignment in California. Well, I had occasion to visit and become friends with an elderly black man named Bill, who had served as a Buffalo soldier apparently, and who lived in a shack that he had built close to the fort here, to the west of the fort. Not very far, but he lived there, and he had been living there for a while sometimes. I would go and visit him at his house, and he always would sit around and we'd eat Vienna sausages. And he would tell me about the old days of when he was in the cavalry, and he showed me his sword. He had a sword, and he would always go into an old trunk and pull out his uniform and dust it off and show me that his uniform, and we just he just became an old friend. And one time we walked into downtown Naco, and the law enforcement there at the time was going to arrest him because they weren't used to seeing an elderly black man with a little white kid. They thought I had been kidnapped. But my father, they called my dad, and he came and straightened things out, saying he was a friend of the family, and that he was just a friend of mine, and that was the end of that, really. But he was definitely a character around town. Everybody knew him. There was not many people of color at the time. Well, we left Naco in 50. My dad took an assignment on the border at Calexico, California, and that's where I grew up. I went to high school there. That's in the Imperial Valley of California, and I went to Berkeley. I got my degree in landscape architecture at the University of California in Berkeley. And after that, I started my career as a landscape architect. My degree was in landscape architecture. I started working in the Bay Area with landscape architects. In 1970, I took an assignment or a job with the National Park Service, where I worked with them as a landscape architect with several projects that involved historic planning of resources that were to be preserved. I served in the military. I was in the Marine Corps. I eventually returned to Bisbee in 1976 to see it. I hadn't been here since I was a kid, and I ended up liking the area very much. I made friends with some old timers who have now passed on, and at the time, Bisbee the mine had closed and everything was pretty much shut down. It had become the beginnings of an artist colony. People were moving in, creative people who were interested in the area because it was cheap to live here and it was beautiful, and we loved the town. It had a real distinct feeling of community. Everybody knew each other. We all helped each other when we could, and it was a nice way to live, to pass on. I took a job later. I returned to the Park Service and worked in Denver, Colorado for 10 years. After that, in 2000, I moved to South America and had been living in Brazil for 20 some odd years until I returned last year, for medical treatment. And I've decided to stay on here in Bisbee because I really, I feel that it's pretty much my home in the United States now. So, and Camp Newell, Fort Newell has always been a favorite place to visit and remember my past here growing up. I would like to see the camp as a place that was not only a site of historical knowledge of the area, but also an area where the community could enjoy certain recreational activities, to have a center as a town center for the community, and to understand why this camp was built and how it can be served and used as a community center where the people can understand the history and then at the same time enjoy the space and the buildings and have a general sort of community center for all people to participate in activities here. So that would be what I would like to see, you know. It certainly has they certainly have the opportunity now, you know. So I think it's a great resource and should be definitely preserved, and people should know about its history.